Hey, what's going on, legends? Welcome back. So in the last video, we talked about JPEGs versus PNGs, when to use them, how they are different, and how to not have that background color show up behind some of those images. So in this video, before we talk about how to move images in Final Cut Pro 10, just like I'm doing that, my Freddy Krueger hand going across the Far Cry 3 background wallpaper. That's actually the ending of the game. It's a great game. I want to talk about frames versus keyframes because you might have seen it, you might have heard of it, and you might not know what it is. Okay, what are frames? Well, a frame is one image of many images that will complete a moving picture. So anytime you record with a camera, you're just taking a ton of pictures at a certain frame rate. Now, what is frame rate or FPS? It's frames per second. Generally, 24 frames per second is like that cinematic look. 60 frames per second is that kind of documentary look, kind of like, I don't know, if like Animal Planet were to shoot something out in the jungle, I'd imagine they would do 60 frames per second. So keep in mind, there's twice as many images in 60 frames per second than there is 24 frames per second. So it's going to look a lot more crisp and a lot more real. Now let's go ahead and look at the difference between, I pulled this up right here. Here's 50 frames per second. Here's 25 frames per second. Now here's 12.5 frames per second. You're going to see how smooth and choppy it is. 50 frames per second up here, 25 right there, and then 12.5 at the bottom. So obviously, the more frames per second, the more images are in that shot. All right, so the more frames, the smoother the transition. Now, there's no right or wrong. Some people still shoot with 15 frames per second. It all depends kind of what you're going for. Do you want like that cinematic look? Do you want a documentary look? Do you want kind of like a rustic kind of retro look? So go ahead and play around with your camera. And I'm going to do a separate video on how to change frame rate in Final Cut Pro 10 because we're going to get outside of the default settings. So that's it. So frames per second, how many frames are in 1 second of video? So I'm doing 29 right here. And you could always tell in Final Cut Pro is because you see these two numbers right here. Nope. How do we get out of that? We've got the 0.01. Let's see how high it goes up to. I think I'm at 29 right now. Yeah. So I'm shooting at 29 frames per second. I think that's probably Final Cut Pro's by default. And then once it goes to 29, it goes over. I will teach you guys how to do 60 frames per second in another video, but for the sake of this tutorial, it's just to talk about what are frames and what are keyframes. Okay, what are keyframes? A keyframe is the location on our timeline that is either beginning or end of a transition, whether we're putting a graphic together, maybe a font, whatever we're moving, we can play around with keyframes with audio. We're gonna get more into it. That's the gist. So if anybody has experience with like Flash or any other video editing software, you might have seen keyframes before. And we're going to talk more about it in the next video. Just keep in mind, frames, how many pictures are in a second of footage, and keyframes is the location on our timeline that is either the beginning or an end. So if you think about it, if you have two keyframes pretty close to each other, whatever you're trying to do is going to go super fast. But if you have a keyframe maybe here at 3.0.2 and then a keyframe here, this is like 15 seconds, it's going to take 15 seconds. It's going to go really slow. Keep in mind, like if we were going to move an image from here to there and do it over 15 seconds, it would move very slow. But if we did a keyframe from like 301 to 302, it would move the same distance, just a lot faster. All right, guys, good luck. And in the next video, we're going to learn how to move images using keyframes in Final Cut Pro 10. I'll see you over there.